Hello everybody, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. Hope you had a great Christmas and you got lots of good stuff. We're going to jump into reviews right now for this first episode in January. These first two figures are from the Warlord line and they're from the Cargear faction, and that is made up of orcs and gnolls and monsters of that sort. This first one is Goloth the Vicious. It's a two-piece model where you have a rather large two-handed axe as a single piece and then the rest of the model as one piece all by itself. He's wearing, as you can see, a significant amount of armor. He's got some plate, some chain, a plate helmet, a very beefy orc here with a lot of armor and a rather large weapon. There are some visible mold lines that are pretty easy to take care of. This was limited mostly to the axe. The rest of the figure really didn't need a whole lot of cleaning. There was one mold line up on a shoulder plate that was pretty easy to file away, not really too much trouble there. Assembly is going to go pretty easy, where you've got the flat ends of the wrists that are going to match up from the hands to the actual wrists itself, so really no issue there. I don't think you need to pin the model. It should be pretty secure. As you might expect by now, I'm going to drop him into my Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay campaign as a leader type for a mob of orcs. You could very easily use him in a D&D campaign. You could drop him into Warhammer Fantasy Battle Army as the leader of a unit of black orcs. I think he'd do awesome there. But all around, a very good beefy orc model that probably has a lot of uses. Next up is another orc. This is a Tundra Stalker, and as you can see, it's a single-piece miniature. He's carrying two swords and is also wearing a pretty significant amount of armor. It's mostly made up of furs, but there's some metal plates here and there on the model. You can see in the video there's going to be a pretty decent amount of cleaning needed. There was some extra flash from the casting process and some mold lines. The most difficult to get rid of were on his biceps, just because that's a curved area and you'll want to be a little bit careful when you're sanding that down or smoothing out that mold line. A nice little extra detail on the figure is on his back he is carrying a large horn. So if you wanted to drop him or use a whole bunch of the Cargear orcs or Reaper's black orcs as black orcs for Warhammer Fantasy Battle, you could use him as a musician. The horn isn't real prominent, so it's not sticking out like he's carrying the horn, but he very legitimately does have a horn, so you could use him as a musician. Next up, into the Dark Heaven Legends line, we have two castings of spider swarms, and they are, as far as I can tell, identical pieces, but you do get two in the blister, and each one is just covered in large and small spiders. I think if you did a base of just like a white primer and then a wash of a dark brown or a black and then picked out a little bit of extra colors in here, you could have these painted up and in the gaming table or in a dungeon in almost no time flat. Alright, and on to some Weird West figures now. First up is Coot Jenkins. He's a prospector from the Savage Worlds line. This is a single-piece miniature of a bearded prospector or cowboy type guy who's carrying in his left hand something that he's probably dug up. I can't quite make out if it's a nugget or something else. It looks more cylindrical in shape, so I'm not really 100% sure of what it is that he's found. In his right hand he's got a satchel that has a lock on it or a clasp on it, and this is probably where he keeps his money and whatever he's found that he's dug up. There is a pretty decent amount of cleaning necessary on this figure. There were several extra bits of metal from the casting process and also quite a few visible mold lines. The more difficult ones to get to were the ones on the inside seam of his legs, but in a couple of minutes he'll be ready to base and prime and get to work on. Now, one thing that I did notice on the figure, he could very easily be converted to be a regular cowboy and not a prospector. Both hands could be cut off at the wrist and put a hand that has a pistol in there. You just need to have or get a hand that has a pistol for either the right and or the left. So very easy conversion here, and that's probably what I'll do with him. Next up, and still in the Savage Worlds line, we have an Undead Outlaw. This is a single-piece figure of, as you guessed it, an undead zombie skeleton sort of cowboy who's carrying a revolver in his right hand and nothing in his left hand. He's wearing a duster and a cowboy hat and has quite a bit of material, not material in the figure sense like it's a bad casting, but material from the he's not living anymore sense. His guts have been shot out, you can see his rib cage and part of the tatters of the shirt he's wearing, so quite a lot of extra detail there that's really nice. His right leg is also kind of messed up at the knee, and then you can see his face or his whole head is pretty much in a bad state of repair, and it's been reduced to just a skull. I don't know if I'd get a whole lot of use of him outside of a Weird War tabletop game or a horror-themed Wild West game, but for either one of those, he's perfect. Next up we have a pack where you get 2 figures and several accessories. These are 2 automatons for the Savage Worlds line, and on a separate sprue you get 2 heads and 3 hand options. Now, 2 of the hands, or 1 hand on each of the automatons, its left one, is already done in a large pincer or claw, so with the right hand you'll have a choice of a Gatling type gun, another claw, or a buzzsaw. Each figure did need a little bit of cleaning. You can see some extra metal from the casting process, but the mold lines weren't too bad. They were fairly thin or faint and were taken care of easily. Assembly, you are going to need to obviously put the head and right hand on each one of the models, but that's really just a matter of picking which one you want and then putting it into place. The assembly itself goes pretty easy. And speaking of assembly, it would be a pretty easy conversion or just part of the assembly process to use a couple of very small rare earth magnets on the wrist joint for each of the right wrists, and then put another one on the end of the weapon from the sprue, and then you could just swap out whatever weapon you wanted if you wanted to go to that extra effort. In addition to their intended use as automatons in the Savage Worlds game, you could get a lot of mileage out of these guys, or at least I think you could, in a steampunk game or even in a weird World War II game called AEWW2, where the US forces have similar looking automatons or robot guys. So I think you have a pretty decent number of uses for these, and I like them. Next up we have a single piece figure from the Chronoscope line. This is Deadeye Slim, and he's a cowboy, and he immediately reminds me of Lee Van Cleef's character in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He was the bad guy, but this figure just really sings out to me as a very good representation of that character. He's wearing a long duster and a wide-brimmed hat, has a revolver in each hand, and in addition to using him in a West game, whether it's regular or a Weird West game, I think I might drop him into a Malifaux crew as a convict gunslinger. I think he'd probably make a pretty good alternate figure for that. Alright everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Reaper Minis TV. We'll see you next time.